Hello, and welcome to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Marketing Podcast, the show where we help you establish your author brand, increase the size of your audience, and sell more books. I'm Lindsay Baroker, and I'm here with my two guests, two co-hosts.
I'm Jeff Poole. I'm a guest now.
And I'm Joe Lalo.
So we're recording live today, so I was like, dang it, I can't screw up the introduction. So, of course, I screwed up the introduction. It's just going to be the three of us today. So we are going to be talking about Data Guy presented at SFWA, the SFWA conference in May, and he's since posted the slides that he did online. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and because there's a lot of great information in there. I don't usually look at graphs and things too much to read, but I was like just scrolling through like, these are great. And he had great slides too. There's like pictures of dwarf warriors and things. I don't know, spaceships in the background. I wish I'd been there for the thing. We're going to talk too a little bit about some of the news. There's been some stuff with people getting kicked off of Amazon recently. So we're just going to talk a little bit about what you should watch out for, hopefully, so it doesn't happen to you. Nothing too gossipy, I hope. We try to not get into that stuff here on the show. But hopefully something there will be useful to you. And if you are listening live on YouTube, thanks a lot for popping in. And Jeff's going to try to monitor the chat a little bit. So no pressure, Jeff.
I'll just say that if I missed somebody's comment, I apologize already because I'm watching the comments fill up. So
all right. Well, hopefully
I'll do my best.
We got some people because this was kind of a last minute. Oh, let's go live. I was going to share my new puppy with you guys that I just brought home yesterday, but it was going to be chaotic and crazy.
Chickened out.
I will bring her on the show when we got a little more of a schedule and I can count on figure out how long I have to play with her in advance in order for her to be mellow and calm to, get lifted up for the the camera. So she is at my parents' house tonight, but I will debut her maybe next month, next time we do this. But so why don't we just jump in a little bit and talk about our news? It's been at least a month since we had one of these Just Us shows. Do you guys have anything new going on?
Oh, let's see here. My first fantasy audiobook was released, doing pretty good. I forget the number. The most recent fantasy book came out. That one, it was my second Pirates/fantasy novels out there, and of course I've already got the comments. Okay, when's the third one? I'm like, it takes me a little bit. I'm getting better, but it still takes me a little bit on here. Only other thing I'll say is I don't know about you guys there, but I'm still noticing ever since I took that expanded distribution off the print copies and dropped them down to below $10. Holy cow, those sales of those things have been skyrocketing. So I'm picking, I think I'm getting either some old-fashioned readers that just prefer the book, or maybe I'm just getting someone that likes the book enough they just want a hard copy of it. I don't know what, but whatever you guys are, I do appreciate it. But that's about it for me for right now.
Did you also put the books on Ingram Spark so that they are available elsewhere in the world and not just on Amazon's channels?
I have not done that. I should, but I haven't yet.
Okay, I was just curious. I put my first two Heritage of Power books up there and did the same thing as you with the lower price on CreateSpace. And I think that does, it gets down below $10, I think. So it was, yeah. I think it was a good thing to do. And I intend to get more out there eventually.
Yeah, my epic fantasies are typically over 100,000, as is most people's there, and I managed to get that price down to $9.95, and apparently that is a really good price for especially for an indie pub book there, because it used to be $12.95, $14.95, and I got some sales a month, but not much. But man, ever since I dropped it, it's just going crazy.
All right, cool. I don't even know what my paperback sales look like right now. Hopefully they're doing the same thing, but I don't know. As for my news, well, I released Cypher Hill, which is the 5th book in the Free Run series, and that's doing okay. I've been doing weekly short stories every weekend. I'll put out around Wednesday, I'll put out a vote and ask people which of 4 things they think I should write a short story on in the weekend, and then I write that during the weekend, and I've done it 8 weeks in a row. So I'm probably I might use those as like the foundation of a Patreon at some point once it hits, say, 12 of them. The most recent winner, I have been afraid to write anything but in my main series recently. And my main series are all 5 books deep now. So we're getting into the point where I'm not getting a lot of new readers. New readers aren't reading the books I'm releasing. So it's a good idea to start a new series, but I've been nervous because I don't write quickly enough to really pump out books in my old series and have a rapid release on a new series. The most recent vote was overwhelmingly in favor of writing an urban fantasy short story. And many people were like, I would love to see an urban fantasy series from you. So if this short story turns out to be popular when people eventually see it, it might be the pilot for a series. So that's a nice thing to think about. And other than that, I've been ramping up my AMS advertising. It's way too early on to say how it's doing because like I haven't even got a baseline of what my impressions to clicks to buy through is yet. Like that's what the entire first stage is figuring out what your thresholds are and how you're going to set your prices. But I'm dipping my toe back into the water to potentially do some hardcore ongoing maintenance advertising, which until now I've never had to do. And it's about where I am.
Yeah, I've got a couple that are still running, but I haven't tinkered with them for like a year. So I don't have much in the way of maintenance ads either. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Dale had a question on that. But let me throw out my news first for anybody that's interested. I can't remember if I talked about this back in May or not, but I decided to go ahead and post the first book in the next series I'm doing on my website, chapter by chapter. I'm putting up about 2 to 3 chapters a week. It's already completed. I think when I started, I had the typo hunter copies hadn't gone out yet. So there are typos. It's not perfect on my website, as people will be inclined to mention in the comments, but that's fine, because if the typo hunters don't catch it, hey, somebody randomly did it. And a couple of reasons why I'm trying this. I really went back and forth on it because I do intend to launch the series into KU and Amazon exclusivity. So I will have to yank all but the first couple of chapters down off my website when I did that. So I was kind of like, well, is it going to be worth it, or should I just do a regular launch? Couple reasons. One, it's an entirely new world, entirely new characters and series. So there's really no reason for anybody to go try it automatically. I am fortunate enough that I will have readers that will pick it up whether there's any familiarity with the characters or not. But it just seemed like a way, since I am planning to do at least 5 books in the series, and I always end up with a perma-free book 1 anyway after the series has been out for a while, to give people a chance to try it without having to pay for it. And I feel like I've seen this in other people do it free on their website to start with, and people buy it anyway, especially if you put it out at 99 cents because they want a copy for their reader. And I'm also thinking, since I've gotten away from doing ARC teams, just because Amazon has just been so hard to tell with giving away advanced reader copies now, they really, first off, if it's not purchased, right, it's a non-verified review. So right away, it's less valuable possibly in the eyes of some readers, and may get, down to the bottom depending on how they sort things. I know on my mobile, on my phone, I've had to go in and actually select that I do want to see the reviews from non-verified readers, that they didn't just automatically show up. So my thought is that if I get, I've got about 1,200 people following along with it with each chapter. And so when I launch it, I can say like, hey, if you already read it on my website and you have time to review it, that'd be great. And even if I just get like 20 reviews from that, it helps get things off to a good start on launch day. And I would probably also give the book to free. I still have the Patreon going. I'm kind of up on the air if I want to keep doing Patreon or just start doing ARCs on my own site for $5 or something a couple weeks before I launch, especially for the books that will not be wide right from the start. I've been, as you guys know, if you've been listening for a while, the last couple of series I've launched into KU and later on moved things wide when things slowed down over there. So that is ongoing on my site. I'm about 13 chapters into that now. So far, reception's been pretty good. So hopefully, I think I mentioned it's kind of a fantasy mystery series with a little romance. So it's going to be one of those like, well, what do I stick it under? Epic fantasy, I guess, and maybe sword and sorcery, but there are guns and there's not that much sorcery. So in going with the not knowing how to write to market theme, or not being willing to do it, I guess.
I tell you, all the crap you gave me about mystery, and I hear you're doing a fantasy/mystery. That's
mystery. Awesome. There are still dragons in the world, and I'm also doing elves and dwarves. This is kind of a nod to all the Tolkien-inspired and D&D stuff I read growing up that I adored. And then when I was looking at what agents wanted, it was like, do not send any of this. Do not want to see a dwarf or an orc or anything like that. I was like, oh man, I got to do my original stuff. I can't do the stuff that's already been done. But my other just little bit of news that I thought you guys might be interested in is that I had my best earnings month ever in June this year on Barnes & Noble. And I will say I did have a BookBub ad in May, but I've had, I've been around since BookBub started. Before they started, I was one of the first, like they just plugged my first book because I was a blogger back in like 2012 or something. So I get rejected lots, but I still managed to get a few a year. So I've had lots of BookBubs on my box sets before, and this was the best earnings month in June. And this was basically off the back of my space opera series, Fallen Empire. I gave away the first 3 for free. The first time I ran the box set with them, it was 99 cents. And this is what I've done with my other box sets too. The reason I wanted to point this out is I'm seeing a lot of stuff in Facebook groups and on keyboards. They're like, oh, don't go out of KU if you're military sci-fi or you're space opera. Or I saw somebody like, there's no reverse harem fantasy stories on Barnes & Noble. I've looked. I mean, I would not assume that because you don't find a lot with a search that there's not an audience there. If you're doing finding Kindle Unlimited and you don't mind any of the stuff that's going on right now and you're not worried, by all means, stay. But I wouldn't assume that you can't build a following on the other platforms or that something is only going to work for KU. I mean, if the people on Amazon are enjoying your reverse harem dragon whatever, threesome, eightsome, I forget what a harem has to be. But if they're enjoying it, probably there's people on Barnes & Noble and Kobo and Nook, Nook and Barnes & Noble being extremely different, Apple, that would also enjoy your story. So if you've been thinking about going wide anyway, but you've heard, oh, there's just not an audience there, I don't think that's going to be true. I feel like you may have to work a little harder. I've seen myself still, the book one perma-free or free for a while leading into a series can still work. Yeah, you might have to play around with advertising. Just if you can't get a BookBub, that doesn't mean it's game over. I understand how hard it can be. My pen name never gets BookBubs. If you're kind of not in a good match for their categories, you're probably just going to get rejected over and over. And I know it sucks. I don't even know why I keep trying, but I still submit for her monthly or so. So that is my news on that. Do you guys have any comments in there?
Not about that, no.
That was really fast, Joe. There's a link to this, but I don't think that's going to work. Somebody's going to post a link to the slides for the YouTube chat, and I will also post it in the show notes once we're done chatting.
Okay.
If I was smart, I would have put it in the description for the show, but I'm out of practice when it comes to doing the live shows.
We're all nervous now. We're like, it's live? What? We can't edit? Okay, before we jump into the news and the slide stuff, just a quick question from Dale, who threw this out on Twitter today. He says, in the author groups I'm in, the consensus seems to be that you need to be using some form of CPC ads these days, whether Facebook, AMS, or BookBub, in order to have any real success. What do you guys think? Do you guys want to answer first?
Go ahead, Joe. I'm working on getting that link in there. It's Google. It's been a while since I've done this. Google is blocking me. So
spammer.
You're right.
Yeah, I'll start with that. Well, actually, we can do it out loud. AuthorEarnings.com/SFWA 2018. That should get you there. But in the meantime, ads. I have gotten, like you heard my news, I'm going to be trying, I am just now trying these ads. I have been a full-time author as my only job since 2014. I've been making a living wage off of it since 2012. So do I think you absolutely need to do the click ads? No, I've made it this far without them. I'm starting them because I'd like to be doing better than I am. So obviously I think there's value to them. But if you rapid release, which I have not been doing, if you have a strong following and a good newsletter and you stay engaged with your readers, I really don't think that you need advertising to continue to make a lot of money. But if you get good at advertising, I think you'll make more money. So that's where I fall on that.
All right, Jeff may still be being a spammer on Google. So my thoughts on this, if you release pretty often, I think you can keep the momentum going. And if you're almost always have something in like the top 100 for some of your chosen subcategories. And we're actually going to talk when we hit the slides about some of the categories that are less popular and possibly easier to rank in. But if you're releasing a lot of books, that may be enough. I mean, I know I think I've heard Amanda M. Lee on a podcast, and I've definitely seen her around Kboard. She does like Witch Cozies, and she's super prolific. She's got a pen name too. I think she's writing like 3 books a month. She doesn't. I don't think she does anything else for advertising. I think she just writes books. That's the impression I've gotten. But most of us are not going to write 3 books a month, and most of us, even if you do the rapid release thing, which I've done with the last couple ones, you still probably will have a 4-month gap or something while you're working on the next series that you're going to launch. Like I haven't had anything out since April except for a pen name book I just threw out there that I've been sitting on since Christmas, and I probably won't launch that series until either the end of August or September. So yeah, you'll definitely see things fall off if you're not doing some kind of advertising. And I'm not opposed to it. We've had guests on the show that are like, yeah, I spend $2,000 a month on ads and I make $6,000 a month in revenue, which is works. And if you can make it work, there's no problem. In my case, I'm not that into it. So I tend to I will do the marketing stuff like all those things, Facebook ads, AMS ads, and depending on the series and how much I care about it, how much I want to invest in it, like how well I think it could do, I'll do the BookBub ads too. Those can get really expensive really quickly, but I will do it around the launch, usually the 2 weeks around launch, and then I kind of let everything just fall off. And it's not that it's a bad idea to keep doing it, especially if you're making money. I mean, I would love to see what somebody could do with my backlist that has the time and the interest in promoting all the book ones in the various series and spend this much a month. But it's very hard to find someone to manage your ads for you. Everybody I've heard from that's more into this and has tried has found that nobody cares about your money the way you do, and nobody's as invested in it, and nobody quite understands your genre and like who to target and stuff probably as well as you do.
It's also the trust factor. Don't forget that part too. You have to trust someone to get in there and tinker.
Right. You're giving them your passwords and possibly access to your accounts. So yes, I think it's possible to do it without ads. I mean, I feel like I'm doing it without ads. I write books pretty often. I've consistently put books out for the last 7-8 years now. So there's definitely I think it works. And I've talked about this before, how the more competitive it gets, the harder it becomes to get any top 100s on Amazon and in the other bookstores too. The more I feel like we're going back to a situation where it's just try to get your book one in the hands of as many readers as possible, however you can. And it may be really hard eventually to rank in those categories without dropping 5,000 for launch week or something. So the more it gets like that, the more maybe just fall back on I'm trying to build a reader base, one reader at a time, and whatever happens on Amazon with the rankings is going to happen. I'm not saying don't try. It's rewarding if you're able to stick up there and keep it rolling. I do think that Amazon actually likes churn, so you're actually kind of fighting against nature when you run the ads. So be prepared to spend money if you want to try to keep your book in the top 100. You're the ones you see that you can stick for a while just on like title, a good release, telling your newsletter, maybe getting some other authors to share your book in their newsletters. You may stick for a while, but the books you see that are there month after month after month, they are probably being advertised heavily. It's because like I said, it's kind of against the nature of the system for a book to continually stay there, unless it also has an HBO special attached to it or something crazy like that.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to stay on top of something like that and keep messing with the ads, tinkering with the ads, that's great. You can actually do that's. I personally think that's what you have to do to keep most of the interest in your back catalog still there. Keep it, people active and interested in it, Jim, as Lindsay was saying. I know full well if I can keep my book one of any of my series continually downloading, which I've got a bunch of them perma free, and I'll cycle through them, then I will see sales. Obviously, all the other ones bump up there, but how do you keep that thing being downloaded all the time? And I'm personally working on like box sets. So I have been trying like crazy, but man alive, BookBub is picky. So I'm trying every once in a while just to see if I can drop my box set down to 99 cents. Hey, BookBub, what do you think? Nah. All right, I'll try again later there. But like I said, I've tried the Facebook. I have not found the right recipe yet to get good results with that. I keep breaking even, which is not bad. Don't get me wrong. But if I'm going to spend the time and effort to try and tailor this thing into something that's going to work for me, it takes time to be able to do that. I just assume be writing. And I also like what Lindsay was saying is as long as you keep writing or releasing a book every couple of months or so, then your name stays out there and interest stays alive. So that's another good way for me anyways to do, keep my back matter going, because back matter, back catalog going. Yeah, I see you laughing. But so I don't do a whole lot of advertising, but I say as long as I keep releasing a book every couple of months, for right now, that seems to do it for me.
Awesome. Yeah, we're all particularly smooth tonight. You guys know we're polished speakers, the three of us.
Damn live shows. It's getting us on edge. Like, okay, well, let's see. Let's make a little note of this time, and Joe can go in there and do his magic. But I still like your whole. I'm with two guests tonight. I'm like, cool. We're guests now. I love it.
You're excellent guests. All right. So jumping into some of the news that's been going on, it is July 2018 is where we are recording this, just in case you're listening in the future. So Amazon has been cracking down, finally, many will say, on a lot of the KU shenanigans, I'll say it, as Joe calls them. And just recently, about 100 plus authors had their accounts completely shut down without warning. Most of these are romance authors. I did see there were a couple kind of big names, and actually really big names, I would say, in indie sci-fi fantasy. So it's not just romance, and it's not just book stuffing. I think we've talked about that before, but that was, you probably saw it if you ever surfed some of the romance categories. It'd be like, here's my new release, and here's 5 more bonus books that were like last year's new releases, and they were trying to just get more page reads in order to make more money from that. So that is some of it, it seems to be. It's kind of a lot of speculation. I know with the sci-fi fantasy folks, they weren't known for book stuffing. I do not know, I didn't read either of them personally, so I just know what I've seen online, and everybody's speculating. It's a little closer to home, right? When it says sci-fi fantasy and not something obvious like book stuffing. Some of the speculation was part of it may be formatting, people trying to kind of game the system with KU with like the extra carriage return after every single paragraph or line, like line of dialogue in a book. And I'm sure that's not the only thing that might have raised Amazon's hackles or set off some flags. But if you are doing that, if you are adding extra spaces or tinkering with the formatting in any way to try to get extra page reads, man, go fix that now before anybody notices. Because I've seen it tons. I've actually, as a reader, it annoys me because I take my glasses off at night and read with the big font. And if there's suddenly an extra page, not page return, but, carriage return, an extra void space after every single line of dialogue, it gets to be a little ridiculous when you're flipping through the pages. So I have actually stopped sampling KU stuff, and hopefully now I'll come back to it if this gets cracked down on. But that's just one reader's experience. I wouldn't say, most readers probably care.
Isn't one of the common practices for these scammer people to put like a link on the front of the book that says, hey, click here for like your free code for whatnot, and the link automatically jumps you to like the back page, so Amazon thinks you did like the whole, like I read the whole book. I mean, did they still try something like that?
That has been one of the things in the past. I think they've kind of addressed that, and now they're kind of going for people that are manipulating, trying to get extra KU page reads. And also there's speculation that some people are doing some things to incentivize reviews, because there's been a few stories that broke. If you guys don't follow David Gogren's blog, it's great to follow. He's been a guest on here, and he's kind of like the guy who's always reporting on the people scamming the system and companies scamming the system too. But so there's a lot going on. Just be really careful right now. It seems like Amazon is really finally paying attention and trying to get rid of anybody doing shenanigans. That's my new word, Joe. It
makes me wonder, like for instance, like how does Amazon view, obviously if it's a link from one point of the book to the other, I mean, what about like a table of contents and you have a link to like the last chapter or author notes? I mean, if someone were to accidentally click on that, I mean, that could that be construed as you're skipping everything in the middle? And I was just kind of wondering, like, how badly do we need those table of contents in there, or how Amazon views them?
I think with the table of contents, you're okay. And I believe it actually says in the TOS that the table of contents should be at the beginning instead of the back, because there was some formatting software at one time that put them in the back. But if you're doing something like...
mine puts a table of contents in the back of the book.
I don't know. But if you're doing something like, hey, here's the bonus content, or some people would publish the new book and the 5 old books, and they put the 5 old books in the front, and they like, hey, jump right to the last page. But I think Amazon's figuring that out, but now they're really paying attention to small stuff. So just to be on the safe side, I'm sure, as Jeff can tell you, you can still get kind of in trouble just because maybe somebody was targeting your account to like make it look less obvious that they were doing read-throughs on scammy books.
Yeah, this story hits a little close to home for my tastes.
Right, and we don't even know, like, if the people that got kicked off, will they be reinstated? A lot of the people who have been falsely kicked off have gotten their accounts reinstated. So
yeah, but Amazon, from what I can tell, Amazon won't do it automatically. The author has got to fight for it.
Right. And so, just it's something to be aware of. And I know a lot of people are doing the extra, because you would think they would just go by word count, but apparently there's a whole bunch of factors that go into calculating KENPC, how many pages there are in your book for Kindle Unlimited sake. And I've heard from people that they will play around with it and can get extra pages added just by changing the formatting and stuff. So stop that. For your safety, stop it if you're doing it.
Yeah, I can attest it is quite a battle to get your account back, even if you are in the free and clear. Pay attention to anything Amazon sends your way, because they'll start giving you warnings, which I disregarded because I thought they were junk. But yeah, they'll get your attention real quick, let me tell you.
I freak out whenever they send anything, no matter what it is. Like, why are you emailing me? I didn't do anything, I swear. All right, but the next little bit of news, I just wanted to bring this up. There have been a couple of trademark cases, authors filing for fairly generic terms and cover design elements. And the author community is really, I would say, up in arms about this, especially this last one was a fantasy thing. I would just say, take a deep breath. I don't know how it works, but I'm going to assume that if anything is considered frivolous or silly, it's just not going to pass muster with the courts. But maybe we can get somebody on sometime. Let me know if you guys are interested. If you want like somebody to come on and talk about copyright and trademark, I'm sure we can find somebody. Like, when does it actually make sense? Like, when are you protecting your brand? And is that something you need to worry about as an indie author? And so it's.
I think that'd be really helpful, because anybody that's an author be like, oh, I've got a question about this, question about that, and more than likely it's all the same, like 5 questions. But it definitely couldn't hurt.
Yeah, I think a lot of these cases have been where authors are they've gotten really popular doing something. Whatever, I keep bringing up the reverse harem just because those are all over Amazon right now. But, so they're doing a thing and then they see success. And of course, then 10 other people come and try to like slightly change the term and kind of try to get the success from the same thing. So I can understand it from the author's point of view, but then you understand too, like you worry from your point of view as another author, like, am I going to be somehow not be able to use these words in my titles in the future? But I would just, if it seems like it's crazy and it's way out there, it's probably somebody else is going to deny the the trademark application too. I don't know. Like I said, we'll look for someone, and if you know somebody, feel free to suggest a guest, and we can get in touch with them. Do you guys have any thoughts on that before I move on?
I think that about covers it.
The only thing I read a little bit when my favorite one of these copyright attempts was the one that tried to copyright having the series name on the top and your author name on the bottom, and the image being a person holding a weapon, which is the description of every book cover for 17 different genres. But the way I understand it, from what I've been reading up on the subject, is basically a trademark needs to be defended. So if somebody has an absurd trademark like that, and it actually goes through, it's probably not going to last past the first challenge. Basically, the first time it goes to court, the judge is going to look at it and say, this never should have been granted in the first place. The issue is, and it's the same thing with patent trolls that have existed for the longest time. They're betting on you not going to court. They're betting on you not having the money to do a court deal and just settling or bowing to their demands. So these things won't last past one challenge, but hopefully that challenge comes quickly.
Right. And if you're wondering if you should trademark something, most really successful book series by big trad publishers are not trademarked, or they weren't until they became an HBO special. And then the name of the special is what's trademarked, not necessarily the original name of the series or the book. Those Hollywood's going to trademark everything. Why wouldn't they? But they have the money and resources to deal with it. But anyway, let's move on, since, as we've mentioned, none of us are experts on that. And but don't, there's a lot of people jumping on people right now in the indie author community, and just take a deep breath. It's probably not going to impact you, even if it sounds like it might. Like Joe said, it probably won't pass muster. But the last thing I want to just talk about is actually possible opportunities. I've just been noticing, surfing through the top 100s of like epic fantasy and sword and sorcery, that there are just a ton of these books now that have like the scantily clad women, succubuses, succubi, and things like that are really, really doing well, at least in KU. And I think it's kind of funny because the guys have had to suffer through all the shirtless man chest covers invading like the superheroes category or something. And now I'm like, what are these doing in my epic fantasy? But I do think the fact that these are really selling so well, I mean, they're still fantasy stories. I don't know if they're erotica or not. I haven't read them, but I think we've had a couple guests on now that have done really well with kind of the stuff that traditional publishing has moved away from because it's not PC, or it's not the image that they as a publisher want to portray for their books. You all remember like the bikini armor women from the 70s and 80s on the fantasy books. And you don't see that so much anymore, but that doesn't mean that there aren't people that are like, man, I miss those bikini armor women books. Please bring them back.
Be a category at Amazon, the bikini armor women.
Somebody I saw like bikini armor, like they made it one word, like it was a term. I loved it. But so just being aware that if that is something you enjoy writing, like the non-PC stuff that's wouldn't fly in Hollywood or big traditional publishing right now, in the indie author community, or just there are people out there that want to see that miss like the sci-fi, how it was back in the 60s or whatever. And so I'm not saying jump on that just because, but if it's something the way you love to write anyway, self-publishing means you can do whatever you want. And we've also talked about before how there are very hungry communities out there that are not being served by mainstream traditional publishing. So if you can jump into that, if that's your thing,
it almost makes you wonder that if you can change your cover to incorporate the succubi that you're talking about there. You're like, okay, think about your book. Do you have any sort of a character wearing that outfit anywhere in the book? Maybe consider putting the cover with that scene, slap it up there, and you never know, might do better.
You're cracking me up because you have these like young, cute animated covers, Jeff. I'm like,
yeah, mine is not going to
stick one on there.
I'll tell you right now, it's not going to qualify.
All right. Although most of these have been animated, which is interesting, and maybe it's a way around stuff that might not fly if it was Photoshop. I don't really know. I haven't tried to push the boundaries in that way with Amazon. But anyway, just a thought. If that's your thing, maybe there are opportunities in writing where that hungry market is, and there's not a lot of competition. All right. Are you guys ready to jump into the slides?
Sure. Bring it.
All right, I'll try not to make this too boring. I'm trying not to just read everything that's on the slides, but we want to discuss it a little bit as it happens. But one of the things he was kind of talking about was that according to like all these surveys and the industry at large that bases everything on like the Nielsen NPD book scan data, sales for science fiction and fantasy peaked around 2009. And then according to them, there's been a really steep decline, which has led like in bookstores for them to start making the sci-fi and fantasy section smaller and author advantages to also get smaller. And I think it's going to be no surprise to you guys there's another side to the story. But it said that after 2009, print sales dropped twice as far in sci-fi fantasy as in most other book genres, but digital sales have taken up the slack. While only 25% of overall sales for traditional publishers are ebooks, it's different with sci-fi and fantasy. Ebook sales make up 37% of traditionally published purchases. And then if you add in sci-fi audiobook sales, things actually seem to be maintaining even or slightly on the rise. So the data, these surveys and stuff are basing it on print sales, basically, and not looking as much as ebook sales. Do you guys read that the same way? That I guess our genre basically is more likely to read ebooks than to buy physical books than some of the other genres.
Oh, it's been my experience as the computer tech, where most of my clients, there's a lot of my clients that are, up there in years, senior citizens and whatnot. They don't really understand technology too well, and it's always, a struggle just to get them just to do real basic tasks on the computer. So I can't imagine they are the target demographic for all this newfangled sci-fi and fantasy that's out there. So I pretty much see them, those older generation picking up the old book, ignoring the Kindle. And I can't tell you how many times I've been to a client's house and I see the Kindle still in the box. And I asked them if they would like me to set it up. And they say, well, I got that last Christmas. I don't know what that thing is. I'm like, okay, we're just going to leave it on the table, that thing for now. But yeah, I see the younger generation picking up like the books, the tablets, the phones, the e-readers, anything like that. So that's what I see, being the target demographic for these new sci-fi stories.
Yeah, and like anytime you see a graph on book sales that starts to show a sharp decline in 2009, which is right around when the Kindle came out, then you can probably assume, or at least you should probably check to see if it disregards ebooks at all. Certainly, sci-fi and fantasy is in the realm of the nerd. I don't think I'm overstepping when I say that's the case. And so are ebooks. So I know I was a nerd and an early adopter for this sort of thing, and they were my genre. So I don't think it's terribly surprising to find out that the high-tech version of the medium is being picked up disproportionately in sci-fi fantasy.
Yeah, you said that better than I did. So what Joe said, that and I don't even know that it's an age thing so much as just because I have readers all the time that are retired, but your state of mind, if you're into like the tech stories and stuff, you're probably more likely to pick up the tech, like Jeff said. So, and the part that's not going to come into it as a surprise to you guys is that, as you all know, indie sales don't get measured by these Nielsen NPD book scan. They're only looking at traditionally published stuff, basically. So
they're afraid of us. They won't do it.
Well, they don't even have a way to track it, really. Like if you're someone like me that doesn't even, I've started getting the ISBNs for Ingram Sparks, but for the longest time I had only the ASIN on Amazon or whatever. So they'd have no idea. You take somebody like Data Guy that's going in and scraping the data on Amazon according to their sales page and monitoring books over the course of a year to figure out how many sales like I would have had. Nobody else is going to know. So, but anyway, just next slide, talking about on the indie small press, this was a kind of a graph that showed shares. Sci-fi and fantasy sales by traditional publishers have become the minority. The Big Five takes 21% of the pie. Amazon publishing imprints take 7%. Other small, medium, and large publishers take 9%. And then indie self-pub without an imprint, indie self-pub with their own imprint, or indie self-pub collectives make up more than 52% of all ebook sales. And that's units sold. He also in his slides takes a look at dollars. Do you guys have any comments on percentage of the graph? Does that surprise you, or is that kind of what you would have thought?
It surprised me that the traditional was down that low. And I know the indies, we've been out earning most of them there, but I didn't realize the numbers are now skewed in such our favor versus them. So I have no complaints.
Yeah, I mean, there are just so gosh darn many of us, and the popular wisdom is if you're going to be successful, you have to be prolific. So not only are there an awful lot of us, but we're releasing them far more rapidly than the authors who were traditionally published. So it stands to reason that the market would start shifting in our direction pretty quickly.
Right, and he mentions that in the slides too, that he actually, is it the question of there's just so many millions of indie books being published that we're going to overshadow them. And it was interesting. I guess I'll get to it below, but it wasn't as many as you would think. I would have thought actually traditional publishing wouldn't be putting out that many books a year overall, like, with compared with us. So it didn't surprise me. But, it's there are a lot of us, and a lot of indie authors aren't making any money or just making a little money. And there are definitely skews, as some like that 3% for indie authors, self-pub collectives. That's 3 people in our genre that are doing that stuff, that are just selling so many books that they actually become a percentage on the pie chart. So yeah, we are being prolific, but we're it's kind of showing that fewer people care whether something like fewer people are looking down to say, oh, okay, I want to make sure this was put out by Orbit or Baen Books. They're just like, oh, this book sounds good, I'm going to give it a try. And I think that's especially true now. Indie publishing has come a long ways in the last 8 years. Your books are looking super professional when it comes to the covers, and a lot of people are getting really good at the blurbs, and you just can't tell at a glance. Sometimes when you open the book, I feel like you still run across a lot that should have gone through a critique group or, had a better editor. Whereas with trad publishing, you're at least everything's going to be grammatically correct, and there's probably going to be a few typos in there. But overall, we've gotten a lot better at putting together a good package in general. But what about the money? Like Jeff said, indie authors earn more in that we take home 70%. So we're going to earn more on each ebook sale. But, trad publishing guys are selling their ebooks at $15 and they're still ranking well too. So they're earning a lot also. It's just that the authors make such a much smaller cut. But it was interesting. He said the average purchase price for traditionally published sci-fi ebook was $8.04. And these was the dates of May 2017 to April 2018. He was measuring it. So about a year. And during that same time for self-publishing and Amazon imprints, the average purchase price was $3.20, with a sweet spot of $4 was like the highest, that kind of $3.99 price point, and $5 right behind it. I thought that was really interesting because my gut feeling would have been, well, we're selling so many books at 99 cents. That's why we're selling so many copies. I do feel KU's kind of shifted that a little bit. You can price higher and people can still basically try your book for free or for their $10 a month subscription. So it's actually interesting that there does seem to be more $4.99 types of books in the sci-fi and fantasy categories. Do you guys think with pricing, is that kind of in line with how you're pricing? I would say that's pretty accurate for me.
For my fantasy, it's my epic fantasy now are all $3.99, and I've had no complaints. Even back when I first started releasing at $2.99, and everybody started raising their prices on me. My illustrator was getting more popular. She raised her rates. The editor raised their rates, and I actually went to the fans and went, "I'm sorry I have to do this, but I'm going to have to go from $2.99 to $3.99." And I didn't get one person saying, "Oh darn, this extra buck is going to break me." Now your books are worth it. Don't worry about it. So, and I haven't had any problems with it. So it's a good price for me.
Yeah, most of my stuff that's over 100,000 words, which is most of my stuff, is $4.99. If it's a full-length novel but not 100,000 words, then I do $2.99. And then there's the odd thing that's 99 cents or free. So yeah, I mean, this roughly, I'm right in the sweet spot that they have in the chart. So it certainly makes sense.
He doesn't like $3.99, either $2.99 or $4.99.
I do $2.99 or $4.99. It's true. I don't think I've done $3.99 in a while. I think I moved all my $3.99 stuff up to $4.99.
I also did a price bump, mostly because Patreon, I started doing that last Christmas, and they've got like a $5 level. So I didn't want to charge people $5 and then have my ebooks be $3.99. So everything I'm putting out now is $4.99, and if it's novel length, like over 80,000 words. Aside from, as I've often mentioned on the show, I am very happy to put out a book one for free or 99 cents to lure people into my series, and I have no problem with that.
Good word.
Lure, because I always feel like as indie authors, it's kind of hard for us to get in the libraries. So I feel that's I know I discovered tons of authors in the libraries before it became so easy to sample things on e-readers. So I figure having something free is sort of my library book or loss leader, if you want to use business terms. And almost always when I do that, there's at least 5 books in the series that does total, and everything else is usually $3.99 if it's short, or $4.99 for full-length novels. I do, as I mentioned, once I have a box set, I might make that free eventually, not with the first, couple years. It's usually after the series has been out, and I've run other ads on it at 99 cents. But there's like 3 books.
Just got a comment popped up on there. From Karen, does Lindsay write under 80,000? Laughing out loud.
I actually have tried to get more closer to that mark. I was kind of like Joe a little bit with my first series. Nothing. I think 105,000 words was the least that any of the books had. And the 8th book by that time was like 2010 words. That's my one and only $5.95 or $5.99 book, whatever it is. I was like, dang it, I deserve an extra $1. This thing is a beast. But yeah. Okay. So moving on, he did factor in KU which was, I don't know how they do it, to be honest, but he mentioned that $30 million a year in US subscription revenue is from Kindle Unlimited, which accounts for 25% of non-traditional sci-fi fantasy ebook dollar sales. So that's us. We're getting a lot of our money from KU right now, Well, however you feel like that, take advantage if you can, be nervous if you want to. And like I said, wide is certainly a possible viable way. It's just often not as easy of a route to gain traction on.
Or avoid it like the plague. Excuse me.
Just trying to get the rest of his account banned from Amazon. All right, so this was interesting. When it comes to money, self-published sci-fi and fantasy authors are now earning a much larger share of the royalty dollars generated by sci-fi and fantasy books than traditionally published sci-fi and fantasy authors. Sci-fi fantasy sales are disproportionately ebook and audio now, digital, which, we get a larger cut on that than the paperbacks. And this may explain why incomes of traditionally published and self-published authors appear to be moving in opposite directions. And you know what I'll say the answer to that is? My traditionally published friends is go self-publish something on the side. And I think we're seeing that a lot now. I'm often running into authors that are, they've got their, flagship series.
Hybrid authors now, right?
Yeah, hybrid authors. Their flagship series, like Chris Fox said, is being traditionally published. I'm like, oh, let me see if I can write some novellas on the side with these characters, if your contract allows that. Or just, take advantage. I mean, even some authors that I remember getting their start back in the 80s, I'll see like, oh, she's doing a series of novellas here, and like through her agency. And, some of the authors that don't want to do everything themselves may have their agent do it. And that's up to you if you want to give up that 15% or whatever. But yep, hybrid is like a really good way to go. Not that there's anything wrong with being 100% self-published either, but if you have the option, a lot of people do like that, a little boost you get. And the readers that are still shopping at bookstores and are never going to find you if you're just on Amazon. All right, do you guys have any thoughts on the money before I move on?
Yeah, about sums it up for me. Audio and print are increasing to where it's taking on the sales of the ebook, so I am not complaining.
Yeah, when like if you looked at those prices we had before, where $320 is the average for self-pub and $8 is the average for traditional. If you crunch the numbers on it, like the 70% royalty, that's $2.25 for the self-published, and traditional, depending on the contract, maybe if you're super lucky and you're making 25% royalty on that, that's $2. So it's kind of funny how things are almost calibrated such that the maximum that either way can make is the same, but the prices are hugely disparity. So it's sort of, when you look at it that way, you're like, so much more of the money comes to me. I can't imagine it would be any other way, but the indies starting to take the bigger slice of the pie.
Right, and it's so much easier for the reader who's new to you as an author to say, oh yeah, I'll try this guy at $3.99, versus I'm always like kind of shocked when I see traditional publishing debut a book from a new author at $14.99 or even $9.99 for an ebook. I understand they want to like sell hardback books too, so they're actually wanting to kind of force you into print sales. But that just seems like, even I made good money and I'm still like, woo, $14.99 for an author I've never heard of. That sample better be really good before I'm gonna drop that, because I know in my case I often do not finish books. I'm a super picky reader, and often if I try the sample and it's only okay, I should know better than to buy the book, because I will probably abandon it at halfway. Another interesting point, just before I move on to kind of talking about the subgenres that were doing real well and that were less competitive, it's just that he made the point that most traditionally published sci-fi and fantasy ebooks purchased in the last 12 months were deep backlist titles published prior to 2015. Non-traditional sci-fi and fantasy ebook purchases were mostly frontlist and recent backlist published since 2015. So a lot of that is just that a lot of the indie authors are newer and they don't have this huge backlist from earlier to, fill out their catalog yet. And then a lot of it is that what people are buying is not necessarily the newer authors, right? It's like, Ender's Game is always in the top 100 for space opera sci-fi. And when did that come out? In the 80s? And the Game of Thrones stuff now is often in the fantasy list, and it's not that you don't see debut authors ever doing well, but it's tough. Like, it's tough right now. And if you are traditionally published and you can't play with your pricing at all, you can't do the 99 cent or the free ebook unless your publisher gets a book club for you and does it for you. It's tough to be a debut author unless you've got them throwing a lot of money at you. And we've certainly had success stories with traditionally published authors on the show, but yeah, that's why I like the hybrid thing. You can have the top of the end Lamborghini for sale for $14.99, but maybe you put out a few Chevy Sparks over here on the side. And I don't know why I'm doing car analogies, guys. I know nothing about cars.
And I just like all the stories we've been hearing where the traditionally published authors are getting angry because they're selling way more copies than us indies, but us indies are making way more than them just because that slice of the pie for us is a hell of a lot bigger. So yeah, as you're saying, we've actually talked to a few people now that have been traditionally published and actually taking some of their own brand new stories and just releasing it to self-published and making a lot more money off of it.
I think my favorite aspect of the fact that backlist is where most of the sales are coming from, or a lot of the sales are coming from, is I only really check my rankings like during a launch week, and which is silly because I don't do big launches anymore. But I was like, oh look, I made the number 4 on the list, right above H.G. Wells, who has been in the top 10 for 80 years. So good for him.
Yeah, and traditional publishing has their proven favorites, right? That they continue to sink money into advertising because why not? These books are popular and classics, some of them, and they've proven that they sell well and that they earn money for the publishing house. But you're not as proven yet if you're a debut author. So if you do go that way, it's probably going to be best if you were able to, of course, it's going to be best if you were able to get a really good advance. It just seems like what we hear from readers, guests we've had on, is that the ones that got really big advances, they get more advertising money behind them because the publisher wants them to earn out the advance. If you just were one of those, here's your $3,000, they can buy 10 books like that and just hope one kind of takes off on its own. And Data Guy said, what happens when the non-traditional deep backlist fills in? Like, in another 10 years when all indie authors that have been at it for a while have 100 books out, or 50 books out, or 20 books out. Jeff, you smirk, but you publish a lot of books. I see you putting those Corgi mysteries out there.
I'm getting better.
All right. Here's the part that you've all been waiting for. I don't know, maybe you haven't, but I thought it was nice that you kind of have a hunch just from looking at the sales rankings of the various subcategories for sci-fi and fantasy. I've always thought urban fantasy / paranormal romance was the most competitive one to get into. You can see it always takes way better than 1,000 sales ranking to even make that top 20, gosh, maybe even the top 100. I haven't looked for quite a while. So I kind of assumed that the most fantasy sold in that category was correct. And it is over 11 million. I see I skipped sci-fi, but I'll come back to you, sci-fi. Over 11 million sales of paranormal and urban fantasy ebooks in that year time. And, romance often sells well, so that's not surprising, especially since those two get lumped together. But so many of the success stories we've had have been people doing urban fantasy or paranormal romance, so it's not surprising. It is super competitive, though. That's the trade-off. Like, if you manage to rank well and get the algorithms to love you by having a zillion also bought links pointing to your page and whatever you're doing, it can be very rewarding. We've certainly seen people making huge piles of money in that subgenre of fantasy. The second most popular by book sales was epic fantasy, with close to 6.5 million sales of ebooks last year. Number 3, sword and sorcery, 4 million ebooks. Coming of age was number 4. That kind of was a little bit of a surprise to me, with 3.5 million ebooks. And just to be clear, these are the categories on Amazon. This is not like the, what do you call it, BSAT code, basic code? You guys know what it is. Yeah. What you got to put in on CreateSpace in those sites when you're categorizing stuff. So these are just the subcategories on Amazon. And number 5 was romantic fantasy, with 3 million ebook sales in that category. So these are all competitive, no surprise, right? It's going to be there's a lot of people buying them, but there's a lot of authors writing them, so you may or may not have a lot of luck in them. Toward the bottom of the list, as far as numbers of books sold, was alternative history fantasy, dragons and mythological creatures, humorous.
Is that really a category in
It's
Amazon?
a new category, and I was going to make that comment. Some of these categories, I think it's just that they're new. But humorous fantasy, Christian fantasy, and gaslamp fantasy. Both gaslamp and dragons and mythological creatures are new ones. But alternate history has been there a long time. I think humorous has been there a while. Maybe it hasn't.
All right, you know what?
Christian fantasy,
Dragons and mythological creatures, self-explanatory. Would you mind defining gaslamp fantasy?
kind of the Victorian. I would actually say steampunk should probably be filed under that rather than under a sci-fi category. In most cases, most steampunk I've encountered has magic in it. But yeah, it's not my favorite thing. So if somebody has a better definition, feel free to throw it in the show notes.
I think that would.
I got Wikipedia up here already.
All right, go Joe, go.
Yeah. Gaslamp fantasy is a subgenre of fantasy and historical fiction. Generally speaking, this is a particular realm of fantasy employs either a Victorian or Edwardian setting. So yes, indeed, this is the fantasy version of steampunk, which is usually classified as sci-fi. So if it's more science fiction, you should call it steampunk. If it's more fantasy, you should call it gaslamp. And I'm sure the readers are well aware of that and know precisely where to search for these books.
No, I'm sure.
I feel like some of the categories of sci-fi and fantasy are only known by like the editors of sci-fi and fantasy magazines that have like, they're saying, we're looking for more gaslamp fantasy. And you go Google it. Oh, I write gaslamp fantasy. Who knew? But so thoughts on those bottom ones is that, it may be harder to sell a zillion books, even if you're in the top 20 on that, but it may be easier to get into those categories and be kind of the big fish in a small pond. We've actually had guests on, I would say, for almost all, if not all of those categories. And maybe we haven't had a Christian fantasy person on yet, but that are making like full-time income and doing well in those categories because they're able to have several books in them at once and keep them selling, and they're less competitive. So that may be something to consider, especially if you've tried urban fantasy, let's say, and you weren't able to gain traction and you were kind of disappointed in how things went overall. It may be you could establish yourself in one of the smaller categories. And you may find too that your series, if you're like some of us and don't really do the right to market thing, it may fit into both categories, and you could just slant it a little more, your blurb a little more one way. Like if what you're writing could go either way, try to make it look like alternative history or gaslamp. You guys have any thoughts on fantasy before I share the sci-fi ones?
No, I think that's about sums it up for me.
I'll just throw in that you talk about like how well you have to perform in paranormal and urban fantasy. I recently picked up a tool which lets you look that up pretty quickly. And in order to hit number 1 on paranormal and urban, you need to be at number 13 overall in the Amazon store. In order to hit number 20, you need to be number 381 overall. So generally speaking, you're selling from at least hundreds to at least thousands of books in order to make the top 20 in that genre.
And we're talking like we're probably in a day's time easily. There was a dog.
Yeah. It says today's estimated number of sales today for the number 1 book is 3,434. So daily sales of over 3,000 to hit number 1 in paranormal and urban fantasy. So that's how well those people are doing.
Damn.
Nice to be them.
Right.
And do you have it up real quick to see what it takes to make the top 100 top 100 at all?
Top 100 isn't on the little summary page here, so I'd have to dig deeper. But I mean, again, number 20 is 231 overall, so I don't know.
Yeah, it's a tough category because they do lump paranormal and urban fantasy together, and romance is just always hard. It's competitive in every romance subcategory. Alrighty, for science fiction top subgenres by ebook sales. Number 1, military sci-fi with over 4 million sales last year. So Chris Fox had it right when he plucked that out of nowhere 3 or 4 years ago when he wrote his Right to Market book. And at the time, it wasn't very competitive. So a lot of people had easy success, relatively easy success, I should say. in that category. And it's interesting to me. I actually would not have guessed. Like, I knew it was a good popular niche under the subcategories for sci-fi, but I wouldn't have guessed that it was number one. I guess I would have gone, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of dystopian stuff out there and a lot of, I don't know, space opera. But let me jump down. Number 2 was adventure sci-fi with just shy of 4 million ebook sales. And it's interesting to compare this with the fantasy. Like paranormal and urban fantasy were over 11 million, and the highest selling subgenre of sci-fi, military sci-fi, was over 4 million. So really huge difference there. As I said, adventure sci-fi is second, just shy of 4 million. Post-apocalyptic fiction is about 3.5 million, and that's third. Dystopian, about 3 million. And since those, in my mind, are almost the same, I kind of wonder if that's why I have the impression that there's more of them out there than the numbers show. They have to have pretty similar covers, and you've got the Earth-based starting point often. So last, let me just jump down. Okay, number 5 is my favorite, space opera, just shy of 3 million ebook sales last year. You guys have any thoughts on those? You guys haven't dabbled much in sci-fi, have you? Joe's got a...
I don't have any sci-fi at all.
I've got sci-fi. I classify my sci-fi. I think the 2 genres I choose are space opera and adventure. Probably adventure doesn't fit, but I couldn't honestly think of a second one for it. And you know, space opera does reasonably well for me. I mean, again, technically, steampunk is a sci-fi thing, but steampunk is its own thing, and it does well enough. I'm happy with it.
Right. I feel like adventure sci-fi is probably like epic fantasy in that, well, my book doesn't quite fit anything else, but it's definitely got adventure. So I'm putting it into adventure sci-fi. I feel like if you tried to study that one to find the tropes of the genre, they'd be all over the place. That seems like kind of a catch-all category.
I'd be interested to hear the difference between the tropes for post-apocalyptic and dystopian. Isn't that close to the same thing?
Well, a dystopian future can be in good shape. Like there could have not been an apocalypse, but things are still terrible. You know, just so happens the people in charge
if
aren't
they're
great.
terrible, that means something bad had to have happened. So
yeah,
maybe
but
it's
all the buildings
maybe it's post-apocalyptic, but farther down in the future, where people have finally gotten over the shock of the happening and they're starting to live their lives again.
To me, it's interesting that Amazon doesn't put these two together, and yet they lump paranormal romance and urban fantasy together. I'm like, well, to me, those are not. Sometimes the line blurs, but they're really, I would say, different. The romance requiring a happily ever after kind of story makes it pretty different than a lot of urban fantasy I've read. All right, to round things up here, just towards the bottom, you know, of the sci-fi science fiction top subgenres by ebook sales, like maybe it'd be a little less competitive to jump in, not necessarily guaranteed a lot of sales, but again, we've had folks on that have found success in these smaller subgenres. Steampunk was towards the bottom, alternative history was towards the bottom, LGBT and humorous sci-fi were all towards the bottom. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Those ones?
I really don't. Yeah, there's nothing else I can add to it anyways.
Likewise, I have steampunk, and while it's down at the bottom, you can still earn a living. For a couple of months, my steampunk was my highest earning stuff. And oddly enough, steampunk is the one where it seems to perform a lot better on non-Amazon storefronts. Like iBooks, steampunk was burning up for a while for some reason. So again, this information I think is all based on Amazon, but it could vary widely on other storefronts.
I've had a lot of stuff that I've put in the steampunk genre because there are steam-powered things. The world's kind of an industrial revolution era world, or a little past that, and I've done well, but generally I would say because they also crossed over into kind of epic sword and sorcery and adventure fantasy, if that was a category like in sci-fi. I do feel like steampunk's really quite niche, and that it's weird because it's like popular at cons and stuff. You'll see all kinds of steampunk costumes, but I don't know how many of these people are actually reading the books. The sales rankings suggest that there's just not a whole lot of people devouring them.
It's more popular as an aesthetic than as a genre.
And maybe that's a strategy, is make something that can fit in one of these smaller, less competitive genres, because that's like my Dragon Blood series ranked in steampunk for ages and ages, and I haven't looked in a long time. There may be in the top 100 still for some of them, maybe not. But even though they were more adventure sci-fi, not sci-fi, but adventure fantasy with dragons and that kind of thing, and they qualified. I could legitimately also put them in epic fantasy because there was a big global scales kind of thing, and so that may be a thought if you're not a right to market person and you just, but you want to like do the best you can with the story you wrote, think to yourself, is it possible that this could be in this subgenre but also appeal to people in this one? And then if you're able to get some big promos or something going on, if you're lucky enough to get a book bub, then suddenly you get shot up into the other rankings, top 100 for epic fantasy, say, and suddenly people are seeing you who never saw you before. So you may be able to enjoy both worlds. I don't know. I'm rambling. Just pretend. It's been over an hour, you guys. Pretend it's making sense. We're almost done.
You know.
I did find this quote from his slides interesting, or kind of what we've been talking about, verifying what we've suggested you guys do. He said, traditional publishers outperform in some sci-fi categories, but underperform in many of the highest selling ones. So sort of that thing we're talking about where there's a really hungry audience and that are not getting enough from their favorite authors. Like, I feel like space opera has kind of been one like that, where there's really not that many big trad published space opera authors out there. And I feel like I've either tried them all or read them all and enjoyed their books, and I'm waiting patiently for them to do more in that one series. So that's something to look at. Like, is traditional publishing dominating the genre you're in, or is they not there, seem to be there at all? And that means you might be able to more easily jump in there. All right, and stuff. I even wrote that in my notes, guys. And stuff.
Highly detailed notes.
Yes. Well, this means that sci-fi and fantasy sales, print, ebook, and audiobook are actually significantly up overall from that supposed high point in 2009. They're up a lot, actually. If you look at it, he's got a graph in there. They've basically doubled since 2010, with the majority of sales just going unreported right now, and thus understating the true popularity of sci-fi and fantasy with readers. Why? And he doesn't know why. He only has the data, so he's speculating that maybe there's some new sci-fi and fantasy readers out there, or maybe old readers are reading more. Maybe former used book readers are now buying ebooks instead since they're less expensive, or former library users are buying ebooks because they're more affordably priced. And I know I used to be a library person, and now I just download samples of stuff because most things are like $5. So do you guys have any thoughts on why the genre would have doubled actually in sales in the last 8 years or so?
I personally would think what you're thinking. There's so many more people that are downloading samples. It's convenience factor. You do not have to get up from your chair in order to sample a book. So, oh yeah, let's take a look at that one. Take a look at that one. That one. Okay, I don't like the writing style of this one. No thanks. Oh, this one sounds interesting. I want to see what happens. It's only $4, $5. Why not buy it? And end up buying like 3, 4, 5 books right in a row right there. So.
Yeah, I think it comes down to convenience. I mean, like, everybody has a cell phone. You can now read books on it. So at some point, it's just like, well, yeah, heck, if it's just as easy to buy a book as it is to check my email, I might as well have a book, you know? I just think that the availability of e-reading devices, almost everyone in America at this point is carrying a device that can in some way read an ebook. It's just going to increase the number of ebooks that are being sold, and therefore the number of books being sold.
Have you ever had people tell you, like, I'm not going to read a book on my phone? Are you kidding me? I challenge you to go to an auto repair shop where there's people that have nothing else to do, and they're sitting on their butts and they're staring at their phone, either watching a video with the provided Wi-Fi or reading a book or something. So
right, yeah.
I've done it.
You're going to spend, 2 hours a day reading on your phone. It could be a book or it could be Twitter. You make your decision. It's
exactly
up to you.
Yeah, I was actually one of those people that's like, I don't get why people read on their phone. It's so obnoxiously small. And then last weekend, I bought a book, I liked the sample, and I really wanted to continue reading it, and my iPad was being a pain in the butt and wouldn't download it for some reason. So I was like, well, fine, I'll just read it on my phone. And I sat there for like 5 hours in my easy chair, just like reading on my phone. And I totally read the whole book that way. So I wouldn't say I'm a convert, but it is convenient, as Joe is saying. I've definitely read samples and things like that on my phone before.
At least you know you can adjust the print size, right? I've actually gone to client houses where they say they love the Kindle, but the darn thing's too small. So I see them reading on the Kindle with a magnifier glass. I'm like, okay, do you see this little button over here? That adjusts the font size. And I usually get smart ass or something, but they don't bother looking.
I do know, and that's why I have the complaint of white space after the paragraphs, because then it gets stupid. You read like 3 words and you have to flip the page. And although when I read on my iPhone, I still have my contacts in, so I'm okay. But when I read at night, I'm like blind. So, all right, we've descended to the portion of the show where we're not talking about anything in particular. So it's probably a good sign that we should wrap things up. We have a legitimate guest next week, not my guest/co-host that will be joining us on the show. So come back for another interview. You guys have any closing remarks?
Nothing that I haven't covered since during the beginning of this. So I enjoyed being a guest. How about you, Joe?
Yeah, it's nice being a guest.
You still had to run what are we in, a Google Hangout?
We're a Google Hangout this time, yeah. All right.
Well, thanks for everybody who stopped by to watch live, and thanks for everyone who's listening. This is episode 191, and I will get the notes to the SFWA slides on the show notes at marketingsff.com, so you can check them out for yourself. And if nothing else, go see how pretty they are with spaceships and warriors and things.
They're very engaging.
I was jealous. I'm like, why don't I have a slideshow like this? All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.
All right. Take it easy.
So long, everybody.